everyone in the panel, Dr. Mesa, and I now give the floor to Teresa. Good morning, Elvia. Good morning, Mexico and Colombia. Good afternoon in Spain. As Elvia has mentioned in this panel, what we're going to be looking for is through the participation of 5 women in Spain, Colombia, and Mexico would be reflecting of some of the contributions of the positive transformation of conflict as well as gender perspective in peace building. And we're going to do this not only by listening to the experience and theory concept of 2 organizations, but also by knowing 2 different experiences, one in Colombia and the other one in Mexico, and with the strategy that have been developed for work with women in situations of conflict. Before we start, I want to mention to you that there is simultaneous interpretation into English, and that we will also are going to be taking all the questions and that you are interested in. We're going to start with Dolores Gonzalez Sarabia. Dolores Gonzalez Sarabia is an economist, a professor, investigator, and expert in conflict transformation, facilitator of dialogue, negotiation, and mediation. She's currently a member of the Assembly of 4håCPAZ, and she was the chair of the same group for 2 terms, 2006 to 2008 and until 2014. She works in the School for Peace that has been replicated in Mexico and 3 countries in Latin America, Guatemala, Honduras, and on the other hand, she has promoted different platforms in different states in Mexico, as well as the Center of Municipal Services, Heriberto Jara, organizations that are popular. She has also worked as consultant in civil society, organizational development, strategic planning, and conflicts. She has a process, she has a work in different conflict resolution and articulation and incidents of victims of severe violations to human rights like forced disappearance. She has accompanied different processes of articulation and incidents in defense of the territory and participated in networks and spaces for analysis and multi-academic dialogue. She's going to talk about the positive transformation of conflicts and the contribution to peace building in Mexico. Thank you, Dolores. Thank you. And for this pace, because we're living through a situation of uncertainty and a lot of complexity. Because this represents all these challenges for peace building and transformation, violence in gender, social, political, at a time of huge polarization in the world and in our country. We are concerned particularly that all the balance resulting from this pandemic, we're going to have a lot more lack of equality and a lot more problems in society. Let's not forget that we have an accumulated process of devastation trend throughout the country, the environmental crisis, and a weakening of social relationships, common sense, collective capacity of auto protection, and conflict as we face these challenges. As we face the huge challenge of defending life, I believe that today speak about peace and the tools that peace has in order to face all these challenges. We understand peace and all of the situations that we work together, like the transformation of everything that generate the transformation of justice in order to put together different ways of livelihood in order to work with the context in such a way that we can articulate the actions today with what we're after in the future. The construction, the focus, a positive transformation in conflicts helps us to look at the future of and short and medium term actions. What we do every day as people and communities and the public agenda to ask for the different changes and conditions that helped us to move, if we understand peace as this process of change towards this society where we want justice, democracy, freedom, the dignity for all, we take for granted that the working in this area means so many things in so many dimensions, in so many levels to build peace from a comprehensive point of view, deep point of view, takes us to look at the need for violence reduction from a different perspective. This is a reduction of violence based on a focus of human security, where we are concerned for people to have more autonomy, to be free of needs, how to do this and from which point to face the different interests, a society that is more equalitarian and fair for the execution of all the rights, for all the social benefits and the redistribution of wealth. Democracy, radical and deep, a lot of the things that are going on take us to think about the decisions a lot beyond just the electoral part in order to construct a society that is participative of a culture of peace that takes us to face differences in a different manner and to acknowledge in diversity a wealth and not a reason for polarization. This road needs an approach of conflicts in a different manner, making out of conflict and acknowledging out of conflict the engine of things. And this is what happens with the proposals of transformation, to acknowledge that the reasons of social conflicts are structural causes. And we need strategies that helps us to move forward in this respect, and conflict transformation helps us to link these different levels, particularly conflict transformation provides the elements to acknowledge ourselves and to acknowledge in these processes of change the capacity of stakeholders that are independent, that are convoluted, not only about the stakeholders, but the surroundings, nature, in a relationship of subjects, where it's possible to build solutions in a productive manner, creating new perspectives and alternatives as we face the problems that we have today and that seem to be problems that are part of society. And this methodology of conflict transformation are linked to our everyday situation. Let me know if I'm running out of time. You have over 5 minutes. Perfect. With time, we have found that as we work the processes of conflict transformation, I'm going to give you some cases that in Mexico were so important. The airport in Mexico City that had some important movement about the defense of the land, all of this that we're going through, the mining industry, oil wells, all of this turn into conflicts that are not going to find a way to solve the problems, because we need to create the conditions and move forward. and with the approach of conflicts, with the interaction of the stakeholders, creating the platforms to approach not only conflict, but everything, and to provide us with the possibility of having other things in correlation of forces in the terms of capacity, incidence, visibility, and communication with society in order for the conflicts to move forward, to change the possibilities of solution, and at the same time they go into different changes by unveiling what is the impact of all of this. Same with what we have seen in Colombia. We have been brothers and sisters, and we have learned so much from Colombia and Mexico. And we had to learn from countries, societies, and organizations that were together with us with this violence, and that helped us to reflect and to build elements to stand from the violence of a victim, to find someone that they love, and with the need to build platforms that from peace we push the construction of a movement with the collective of victims in the country, with a response to the search of justice for those people that have disappeared, to change the conditions that otherwise would not be possible to move forward to a particular conflict, and at the same time to create the possibilities to eradicate these problems. So this is the design that comes from conflict transformation that allows us to see everything that from the short, medium, and long term, and to have them go through these processes of change. And the same from other areas. And I would like, in the minutes that I have left, to refer to what conflict transformation means in terms of education, because I believe that our society right now, with polarization, would demand from us as peace builders to be placed in a situation to speak about the alternatives in the process of changes. And this is where culture of peace and conflict transformation is going to allow us to look into other emerging points that are basic, such as patriarchal relationships that go through different situations, the perspectives of where do we approach this. The perspective of change allows us to be coherent in order to change and transform all the ways. If we don't do this from the way that we relate to each other, that we move in our organizations, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that these processes of change are going to take us to different areas of the conflicts, and that this can move to the construction of new social, political, systemic relationships that may be different. So here I bring the topic of gender on the table in focus, but not only in focus, but in the agenda, and also structural change, and to acknowledge one of the times that are being achieved by going out to the streets in a collective, common manner today in the world, to have an anti-systemic approach. I think as peace builders, we need to learn from there in order to add to the other efforts that are being made in order to speak about the culture of peace with this fundamental content of systemic change. At the end, I would say that conflict transformation take us to a prevention strategy when we talk about peace building. With this, we would be able to build structures, relationships, looks, views, culture that in the future would avoid violence, that this has no space, that help us to have a clear horizon of where to go at a time where complexity takes us to think that is not possible to move forward beyond the immediate problems. In this sense, the positive transformation takes us to a series of possibility in peace construction. And I would go to raise my eyes in warning at a time that would take us to a crisis that cannot be, overcome, a regression on the rights in a way that society faces this crisis with civilization. And I think peace builders here, we can add another dimension about where to go, what to do in the short, term and in the everyday life. I think those of us that are committed with this way to see things and the way that we have to move forward from peace building to the visions of society that maybe we're not holding, but it has the ethical, political outlook to approach conflict in order to create something good from a place where we stand. In a polarized world where culture is the confrontation and gives us an alternative of method, vision, and sense. With women and peace builders. And this is something to focus feminism that is in this proposal. I think it's very important to leave this on the table. We're going to listen to Manuela Mesa, who is a director of the University Institute de 4päZ at the University of Madrid. And she's also director of the Center of Investigation for Peace, 4päZ, from the Foundation of Peace. She is vice president of the League for Women and Peace and Freedom in Spain, and she's a member of the Committee of Experts of Global Peace Index. Since 2009, she is ahead of 1325, Tejiendo la Paz, that can be found in the link of with the same name on the internet for the promotion and incidence of 1325 resolution of the United Nations, included in the organization of seminars and putting together documents in the participation of women in peace building. Also, Visible and Transgressors program in education from gender perspective. She has different publications in gender and peace building. And since 2004, she's leading the group of peace and conflicts. We thank Manuela about gender perspective and peace building.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Teresa, por la presentación y muchas gracias a todo el equipo de la Universidad Iberoamericana y en particular a Elvia por organizar este congreso. Desde luego, para mí es un honor compartir con todas las ponentes y una oportunidad también para intercambiar. Me hace mucha ilusión intercambiar con personas tan relevantes de México y de Colombia.
With so many people from Mexico
yo voy a hacer
un
breve balance de lo que ha supuesto la resolución 1325 sobre mujeres, paz y seguridad este año que se cumple su 20 aniversario, dado que esta resolución fue un paso importante en la incorporación de la perspectiva de género a la construcción de la paz. Permitió abordar el análisis de los conflictos armados en su complejidad, como muy bien ha mencionado Dolores, incluyendo las experiencias de hombres y mujeres. Y también ha supuesto reconocer el impacto diferencial de los conflictos armados y de la violencia en hombres y mujeres. Y por lo tanto, las políticas que se promueven para la prevención de las violencias y la construcción de la paz tienen que incorporar las necesidades de las mujeres y niñas, así como sus aportes y propuestas.
as well as a
visibilizar los
different
aportes
proposal.
de tantas
With
mujeres en
the
la
visible
construcción de la paz,
contributions of so
me
many
parece
women in
algo
peacebuilding,
esencial,
I believe
porque
it's
todavía en
essential
la actualidad existe un
because
escaso
currently
reconocimiento del papel que
there's
han
not a
jugado
lot of
muchas de
acknowledgement
ellas
of the
como
role
actores de
of
paz
many of
en
them
el
as
ámbito de la prevención y resolución de conflictos, en el
people of
ámbito de la
that
justicia,
build peace
de la
in the area of
participación
justice,
política y de la
political
educación, entre otros
participation,
ámbitos.
education, among
Hablo de la
others.
resolución
I'm
1325
talking
porque es
about
una
Resolution
resolución distinta
1325
a otras
because this is a
resoluciones de
different
Naciones
resolution, different
Unidas.
to other resolutions
Se
from the
adopta como
UN,
resultado del
and
trabajo durante años
as a
de
result of the
organizaciones
work
sociales, de
done for
organizaciones de mujeres
years of
que
different
apostaron porque se
groups,
incorporase la
organizations of
perspectiva de
women,
género en la
trying
agenda
to incorporate in the
internacional
gender
y
perspective
lograron
in the
finalmente que en el año
international agenda.
2000
And
se
at the end,
adoptase la
in the
resolución
year 2000, they
1325 sobre
adopted
mujeres, paz y
a
seguridad.
Resolution 1325 in
Durante estos
women,
20
peace,
años, las organizaciones de la
and
sociedad civil han
security. The organizations and
impulsado esta
civil
agenda, que es
society
una
have
agenda muy amplia,
promoted this
que
agenda
incluye
that is a
múltiples
broad
aspectos
agenda
relacionados
that
con la
includes multiple
prevención, la
aspects related
participación y la
with
protección de la violencia
participation
y en
and
diversos niveles, en el nivel
avoidance of
multilateral, en el
violence at
nivel
different levels,
regional,
multilateral,
nacional y local,
regional,
y además
national, and
participando
local,
múltiples actores, aunque
with
sin
different
ninguna duda las
stakeholders,
protagonistas han
even though
sido
there's no
las
question
organizaciones de mujeres a lo
that
largo de estos
the
años.
at the
Me parece
center
muy
have been women
interesante la idea de
throughout the years.
multilateralizar
There
la
are
agenda
multiple
local y
sides
al
of
mismo
this in the
tiempo
local
traer
agenda,
del
and at
ámbito
the same
multilateral al ámbito
time,
local
and to
parte de
bring this
estos
to the
debates, ¿no?
local
Y
arena, part of this
la
debate.
resolución 1325 ha contribuido
Resolution
a esto.
1325 has really
También
contributed to this.
ha mantenido viva se ha intentado cambiar el
They
lenguaje de
have
los tratados y de los acuerdos
tried to
internacionales, por
bring
ejemplo, pasando de
the
mujeres a
international
hablar de
agreements
género,
going
que es muy
to
importante. La
women to
resolución
talk
hablaba de
about
mujeres,
gender
paz y
is very
seguridad, pero ahora hablamos
important
de
because
género, que es algo
women,
mucho más
peace, and
complejo.
security. Now we
Abordándolo
talk
como una
about
agenda de
gender
los
is a lot
derechos de
more
las mujeres,
complex,
con un enfoque transformador que
with
incorpore el
a
feminismo y
transforming
que desafíe el
focus
propio
in
concepto de seguridad
feminism, that it
internacional, poniendo
challenges
en el centro a las
international
personas y sus
security, placing
necesidades,
at the center
poniendo sobre la mesa
people
también, por
and
ejemplo, cómo
needs,
la desigualdad genera
and
violencia y
how the lack
planteando
of
la necesidad
equality
de
brings
transformar las
along
estructuras que
violence
generan
and the need to
desigualdad, que
transform the
discriminan a las
structures in
mujeres,
the lack of
que ignoran sus
equality that
conocimientos y
discriminate
saberes.
women, ignore the
Y estas
knowledge
violencias
and
se
everything
profundizan
they
en las
have.
situaciones en conflicto armado, lo
And
que se ha
this
llamado el
makes it
continuum de la
difficult in the
violencia, pero que
situations in
situación de
armed
conflicto
conflicts,
armado o situaciones de
in
violencia
armed
extrema se
conflicts and situations
exacerban.
of extreme violence.
Durante
This
estos
is
años, en el trabajo en
exacerbated.
torno a la resolución
With this, the
1325,
work that is
lo
internal to
que se ha
Resolution
conformado es un
1325, what
movimiento
has been
internacional de
put together is an
mujeres
international
que
movement
han
of
trabajado en
women
red, que
that
han
have
compartido
worked as
análisis,
a network. They have
experiencias
shared
y que han hecho
analysis,
importantes aportaciones a
experiences.
esta agenda
They
de
had
género,
made
paz y
important
seguridad,
contributions
trabajando
to this agenda of
simultáneamente en el
gender
ámbito local
and
y en el
security
ámbito
and
internacional.
working in the
El
local
contexto en
area
el que
and
celebramos el
international.
aniversario
The
este de
context that
2020 es
we
muy distinto
celebrate this anniversary in 2020 is very
al año 2000
different
en el que se adoptó la resolución
than when
1325. El año 2000
Resolution
fue un año
1325
de
was
auge
adopted,
importante del
the year
multilateralismo,
2000.
de
It
avance
was
y
an
consolidación de
important
las organizaciones
year,
regionales. Se adoptaron
advances,
en aquel momento los
consolidation
objetivos de
of
desarrollo del
regional
milenio, que ahora digamos se han
organizations,
sustituido
reaching the
por los objetivos de
Millennium
desarrollo
Development Goals.
sostenible,
Now they
pero
have
que
been
supusieron un paso
replaced by
importante en la
sustainable
conformación de una agenda
development
global y en la
goals,
definición
and
de unos
with a
objetivos
global
y
agenda and the
metas a
definition
alcanzar,
of objectives
en el que además las
and
organizaciones de
goals
la
to
sociedad
be
civil
reached,
fueron
and
adquiriendo un
the
protagonismo
organizations
cada
in the
vez
civil
mayor en el sistema de
society
Naciones Unidas
became
y
more and more
exploraron
important in
formas
the
de
UN system and
participación,
explore ways to
organizando, por
participate,
ejemplo, foros paralelos para
organizing
llevar sus demandas y sus reivindicaciones
fora,
al ámbito
trying to look for
internacional.
reivindication to
Pero
the
20 años más
international
tarde
arena.
estamos en un momento, yo diría, de
20 years
involución en
later,
el que se ha
we
producido un
are at a
debilitamiento del sistema de
crossroads
Naciones Unidas.
where there's a
Este año
weakening of the
precisamente que se
UN
celebra el
system.
75
This year, they
aniversario,
celebrate the
podemos ver que
75th
la institución
anniversary,
enfrenta
and we can
importantes
see
problemas y
that they're
desafíos.
facing important
En algunos casos,
problems and
su
challenges. In some
liderazgo es
cases,
cuestionado por
their
algunos
leadership
gobiernos, como
is
es el caso de
questioned
Estados
by some
Unidos, ¿no? Que
governments
ha
like
actuado
the
al
United
margen
States, that they have
completamente y ha
acted,
roto los
you know,
consensos
just to the
internacionales.
side in
Y
front
además yo
of
diría que hay una
international
ofensiva coordinada
conflict,
en el
and I
plan
think
internacional
there's a
contra la agenda de
coordinated
género, lo que se ha llamado la
offensive
ideología de
line
género,
in
que se ha
gender
extendido en
agenda,
muchos
what it
países
has been
y que
called as
ponen
the
en riesgo algunas de
ideology
las
of
medidas
gender
que se han
that plays
adoptado
at
para
risk
proteger a las
some
mujeres
of
de
the
las
measure
violencias
adopted to
machistas y
protect
para promover su
women
participación en la
from
toma de
the macho
decisiones.
violence and to
Como ha
protect their
planteado la
participation in
alta
decision
comisionada de Naciones
making.
Unidas para los
As the
Derechos
High
Humanos,
Commissioner of
Michelle
the UN
Bachelet,
for Human Rights, Michelle
los derechos
Bachelet,
que estaban
has stated
consagrados en,
the
por ejemplo, la
rights that
Declaración de
were
Beijing, pues
just
están
like
siendo
in the Declaration
cuestionados
of
y atacados
Beijing, they were
en este
just at
momento,
the highest level. They're
especialmente los que
being
tienen que ver con los derechos
questioned,
sexuales y
particularly the ones
reproductivos.
that have to do
Y
with
están
reproductive
resurgiendo
and sexual
discursos que
rights.
legitiman la
And we
desigualdad y la
hear once
violencia.
again
Ella ha
different
dicho, los derechos de las mujeres no
speeches
son
that
negociables.
legitimate
Y es
the
verdad, o sea, es
equality,
así,
and
¿no?
they have said
Pero al
that
mismo
the
tiempo yo también
rights of women are
resaltaría, como ha hecho
non-negotiable, but
Dolores,
at the
estamos también
same
en un
time,
momento
like
en el
Dolores
que
have said,
hay un
we're at a
importante
point
movimiento
where
feminista
there's an important feminist movement
con un montón de propuestas
with a lot of
internacional en el
proposals
sentido de que hay agendas comunes, hay vínculos
from the
comunes
international
y esto es muy
arena. Some
importante.
areas are in
Y esto se ha
common, and this is
traducido en la
so
incorporación, por
important.
ejemplo, del
This
feminismo
has been
pacifista
translated in the
como una
incorporation of
agenda
pacifist
transformadora
feminism
que trata
as a
de ir a las raíces de la
transforming agenda that is
discriminación y a
trying to
los
go
factores
to
estructurales
the
que
roots of
legitiman la
discrimination and the
violencia
structural
y que
factors that
desafían las
legitimate
estructuras
violence
patriarcales
and the
de poder.
challenge the different patriarchal structures
Bueno,
of
muy
power.
brevemente, ¿cuáles han sido los
Very
principales logros de
briefly,
la
what
agenda?
are
Pues
the
bueno, yo
main
diría
challenges
pues
of the
el
agenda?
trabajo
Well,
de
I would
incidencia en el
say
ámbito multilateral
work and
a
incidents in the
partir de redes de
multilateral
organizaciones de
arena
la sociedad
with different
civil que han
organizations in civil
trabajado pues
society
para que
that
se
have
incorpore en la agenda
worked
internacional
in
la
order to
perspectiva de
bring
género.
the international
El segundo otro
agenda to
logro que me
gender
parece
perspective.
importante
The
es que esta
second
resolución se ha
big
traducido
challenge
en
that I
planes de
believe is
acción
important
como
is
una
that this
herramienta
resolution
de
has been
incidencia
translated
política
into
en el
action
plano
plans as
nacional y la
political
experiencia de los planes de
incidents
acción ha sido
agenda.
muy
The experience
desigual.
of the
Pero yo
plans of action
resaltaría
has
algo,
been
aprovechando
very
que está nuestra colega
unequal.
de Colombia,
And
que
since we
siempre me
have
ha
our colleague
sorprendido. Hay
from
países que tienen
Colombia,
planes
she
de
has
acción
always
los planes de acción
surprised me.
han sido
Sometimes they
una
have plans of
herramienta para las
action,
organizaciones
and
de la
this has
sociedad
been
civil
a tool
para discutir con
for
sus
civil
gobiernos
society in
una
order to
agenda de género
discuss
y
with the
construcción de
governments
paz.
a
Pero
gender
incluso países que
agenda
no
and
tienen
peace
planes de
construction,
acción,
even
como es el
countries that
caso
have no
de
plans of
Colombia,
action.
yo
Like in
pienso
the
que ha
case
sido
of
una
Colombia,
referencia
I
importante
believe
para
that
las
to make an
organizaciones de
important
la sociedad
reference for
civil
the
que la han
organizations
utilizado
in
como un
civil
instrumento
society
en el
that have
ámbito
used
local para
them
impulsar
as an
políticas
instrument in the
públicas
local
de género
arena to
y construcción
promote
de paz,
all
¿no?
of these
También
agendas
es
in
muy
gender and
importante cómo ha
peace
habido una
building.
apropiación
It's
de la
also very
agenda de género,
important
paz y
to see
seguridad
how
en el
the
ámbito
agenda
local, en lo que se ha
gender,
llamado la
peace, and security
localización
has
de la
moved
agenda, ¿no?
in
Que se
peace,
ha centrado
like
en
the
promover políticas
location of the
públicas en el
agenda that
ámbito
has been
local
centered to
para
promote
promover una mayor
public
igualdad en
policies
los
locally
procesos
to promote
de
more
construcción
equality
de paz
towards the
y ha
processes for
mostrado
peace
cómo
building,
el
and
apoyo
has
a las organizaciones de
shown how
mujeres
the
es una
support
apuesta segura
to
por un
women
conocimiento más
organizations
amplio e
is something that is going
inclusivo
to
de lo que
take us
sucede
to broader,
en las zonas
inclusive
en
knowledge
conflicto, ¿no?
of what happens
Así
in the
como sobre
areas
las
of
necesidades
conflict,
reales de la
and
población que es víctima
like the real
de la violencia.
needs
Y además ha contribuido a
in
fortalecer
violence,
el
and
tejido
have
social. Los
strengthen
principales
the
obstáculos han
social
sido la falta de
fabric.
voluntad
The main
política de los
obstacle have been the
gobiernos
lack of political will
en
of the
aplicar
government in
esta
using
resolución.
or applying
Probablemente el
this
mayor problema es
resolution.
que en muchos
Probably the
casos
biggest
las
problem is
propuestas
that
para avanzar
in
en la
many
agenda
countries, the
no están
proposals to move forward
institucionalizadas
in
y no
the
forman
agenda are
parte
not
del núcleo central de la
institutionalized
acción
and are not
y por lo
part of
tanto dependen de
the
la voluntad personal
central
y
part
se considera
of
como algo
as a
opcional que
nation,
se puede
and it
aplicar o
depends
no.
on something that
Y
is
existe con
optional that can be
frecuencia, no
applied or not.
existe el vínculo o este es
Frequently,
muy
there
escaso
is
entre los
no
documentos
link or is
políticos
very
que
scarce
definen unas
in
líneas de
political
actuación
documents
y
that
las acciones que después se
define
llevan a
the
cabo
lines for
en el
action and
terreno.
different
Por lo
actions that are
tanto, no
going to
se han
take
logrado
place.
en muchos casos
Therefore,
convertir las
in many
palabras
cases, they
en
have
hechos
not been able
concretos que
to turn
supongan
the word
una
in
transformación de
concrete
las
facts
estructuras
that
que
suppose a
discriminan,
transformation of
excluyen o
structures that
legitiman las violencias
discriminate, exclude,
contra las
or
mujeres.
legitimate
También,
violence
digamos,
against
otro
women.
obstáculo ha sido los
Also,
intentos de
there have
securitizar la
been different
agenda o de
attempts of
cooptarla, desviando la
trying
agenda
to
centrada en los derechos
ignore
de
the
las
agenda,
mujeres
deviating the
a
central
otras
agenda,
cuestiones, por
the
ejemplo,
rights of women,
asociadas
to
con
other
el
areas
extremismo violento o el
associated by
terrorismo.
extreme
Y por
violence or
último, el
terrorism.
último
And
obstáculo ha sido la
last,
escasa dotación
the last
financiera de estos
obstacle
programas
have been the financial part of this program. In cases, in paper, we have one thing, but in the implementation, we have some others. The pending facing challenges.
Yo diría que lograr un mayor liderazgo de las mujeres en los ámbitos de paz y seguridad. Un segundo reto es proteger los derechos de las mujeres y niñas durante el conflicto y después del conflicto. Asegurar una planificación con perspectiva de género y mecanismos de rendición de cuentas. Fortalecer la arquitectura de Naciones Unidas en cuestiones de género y, como ya he dicho, financiar adecuadamente esta agenda de mujeres, paz y seguridad. Desde luego, el reto para avanzar en esta agenda, para que tenga además un enfoque transformador, desde luego, pasa por desafiar el propio concepto de seguridad, para ponerlo para centrarlo en lo que sería una seguridad centrada en las necesidades de las personas. Y las organizaciones feministas llevan años insistiendo en la importancia de invertir en paz en lugar de invertir en guerra. Por lo tanto, digamos, esta agenda sigue siendo totalmente vigente y de alguna forma yo diría que muchos de los retos que se plantearon en el año 2000 siguen estando vigentes y por lo tanto el trabajo continúa. Muchísimas gracias.
And the work continues. Thank you so much. dialogue with the organizations of women, the different territories, and with the women that were in the FARC, like in the government, trying to look at all the different measures on the peace group. And this has been one of the most important things that have been positive, considering that the agreement of peace for us has become a benefit, a public benefit of protection, particularly because it reflects a lot of the things that we have taken forward. They know it, they've had a process, the active participation of women has been extremely important, guaranteeing that the final document of the agreement of peace would reflect so many of the structural inequalities of women in a society like the one in Colombia that has seen the hegemonic differences, social particularly. We have seen over 100 measures for women, and that the advance in the movement of women with diverse gender identity. And you have seen that this is an object of an ideology of gender, and that I'm going to be closing with. And this has allowed us to have a clear idea of the implementation of a peace agreement for women. And this is the over 100 measures that have taken us for the follow-up in this period that is not easy after the signature of the peace agreement. But this dialogue was not only the measures, it was extremely important, and it was thanks to questioning, to reviewing international experiences, to speak with other women, to see how they have done it, to get the advice of other women. It has helped us and the women in Colombia, but not only that, but something of other women in other social areas have changed and taking us to other experience. This has been key. And the dialogue and the agenda. Topics like the thing about the land. This is fundamental. And the lack of equality in land. To talk about the land and not having land for women is the same as being slaves, with the fundamental advances, regardless of this being slow in all areas, particularly in the ideas of gender. But to have these reflections and to center this reflection in the conflict of peace, it's clear for many, many years, like in other countries, like in Colombia, we have not been in that area. This reflection allowed us to see this in the demand of women being more and more included in the policies of land ownership, access, and the measures and all the different measures that we have in the peace agreements. But also, and with the dialogue that we have, that Manuela and Dolores have mentioned, here women have also had many elements for discussion. Of course, we are talking also about a different type of security than the one that is militarized, but we know that they have a human security that will identify and acknowledge intersectionality, and maybe it cannot be the same thing for all human beings the same, because at the end of the day, what we have learned being feminist, advanced, and feminist movements is that the subject is not neutral, and in this sense, it cannot be neutral in front of human security. It would have to be non-binary, intersectional view, that includes to revert the total expense, to question the security that is reinforces the different system, homophobia, patriarchy that we have seen in the case in the last few months, where there has been an increase of all of this, where the repression, where the system, and the look that this reinforces everything. This experience has allowed us to feel women as a central agent of change and transformation.
Finally, we demanded implementing the peace agreement, not only to guarantee that the national government will leave specific budgets. This is something we haven't accomplished. This is an deficient government in terms of the reports presented and the follow-up on the budgetary marker for peace, which is part of the national budget for the implementation of peace agreements. And this has been accompanied by a collection of evidence of everything that has been done in terms of the peace agreement to proceed on spaces of international incidents to reinforce that incidence in peace agreements and the guarantee of life and dignity for women. Finally, all this has taken place in a context of very complex situation. As Manuela was saying, we are a country that does not have a national action plan for Resolution 1325. And in this last year, efforts have been made at the government level. However, the voice of women has not been recognized. Their organizations have not been recognized. Their movements have not been recognized by the government. Although we've been working on 1325 for so many years and we participated in the creation of 1325. We're also looking a context in which rightist ideologies are progressing and moving forward. This is part of the history of Colombia. However, we do have a guarantee for our rights. We are also saying, on the other hand, that a woman per se does not represent women's agenda, especially where she has held a conservative position vis-a-vis women's agendas. And we also see there's a lack of will to move forward on the implementation of the peace agreement and to remove implementation of the bases that gave way to the armed conflict. For instance, the land tenure issue, but also the structure of inequality for women. In all this framework and context, Colombian women, we are betting on peace, recognizing diversities, peace built through a social dialogue and not the imposition of weapons and arms. Thank you. Thank you, Diana, for this wonderful effort in 20 minutes explaining this story with so many ramifications and insights. Thank you. Now we have with us the experience of the National Networks of Human Rights Defenders in Mexico. They will be talking about construction of peace-building strategies. We have with us two members of the network in Mexico. We have Gloria Guadalupe Flores Ruiz. She teaches constitutional rights and habeas corpus, and she has accompanied peasant indigenous women. For 11 years, she worked at the Chiapas Women's Rights Center, and she has worked with indigenous women and community activities. She is co-director of human rights. And we also have Dora Avila. Dora is a member of the women's groups. She is an Afro-descendant woman, popular educator, and she is also teaching and has worked with different organizations. And she has worked for the women's rights, Nashu, at the Oaxacan Isthmus.
de Defensoras de Derechos Humanos en México desde el año 2010.
The leaderships, the collective work, as well as the spaces among different women that are defending, to recognize and acknowledge the different causes and the consequences, and also to generate proposals for the transformation, locating in places personal events as well as the collectives for self-care, mutual care, well-being, and healing. This center in political action looking to strengthen social movement that we belong to, and also to make it possible the continuity as we fight for human rights. This way, from these spaces, we can see the different outlook of this women that are defending. We are defending access to truth and justice, the right of women, the right of a life free of violence, right to information, right to free journalism, the collective rights of indigenous people, the rights and freedom, and also we see the different context where we execute the right to defend human rights. And this is important because this comes from women being diverse, defending our different areas and our contributions in the different areas. Something that for us is important to underscore is, as we defend everything, we're always facing and defending violence and conflicts. And here we want to build societies with peace, justice, democracy, and that in order to achieve this, we need to concentrate in the processes, whether they're individual or collective. From the network this year up to September 2020, we have identified that the rights that are attacked the most are the right to information, to the freedom of speech, the right of a life free of violence, third, the right of truth, and fourth, the right to land. Also, those that defend the rights are the ones that have lived more attacks. And to locate the context in human rights, this means to face that these are spaces of violence, these are contexts of violence that go beyond all the parties that are involved in the territory where this conflict happens. So for us to know and understand the complexity of the conflicts is the starting point for every process that is trying to transform all the situations. And this is how, and under this framework, that peace building from the participation of women, from the participation of the women that defend human rights, means to create spaces of dialogue among women, like our colleague from Colombia mentioned, because of our condition of gender, but in order to share with others our experience and to have the complex that are an impact in a different way. And with this responsibility of women, because we're part of this patriarchal system and with cares of others. And this places us in processes at the limit in life and more exposure to the macho violence. Resolution 1325 sets the participation of women in peace processes in the case of those that are the defenders besides 1325 that we consider that is important to mention. Resolution number 30 in women in the conflict prevention and situations of conflict. It's a part of the Committee for the Elimination of All Ways of Discrimination. In this instrument, when it's clear to make it visible how these women that are defending in the process of peace building in conflict and the obligation of the governments to defend women that are working in peace building, for us, a comprehensive protection in feminism is a tool for peace building and for the national network. This has meant that to make a reflection on the protection of these advocates is important because Latif and the national network comes up in a conflict and in a context of extreme violence, like the period in the administration of Felipe Calderón and his fight against drug trafficking, and everything in order to achieve for Mexico that, we're working in human rights defense. Another element that we consider as something important in PEV is that we reflect in the knowledge that we need to be alive in order to continue fighting and contributing to building a society that is more fair. The threats come not only from outside, but it has an impact in our physical health. We're tired, we are stressed. How do we see all these three in our bodies, in our emotions, and how we go through our beliefs? We're not a machine. We assume that in order to continue working in human rights, we need to concentrate in feeling safe, to know that the work of defense at the university is an element for social transformation. Here, we consider the structural causes of violence. In order to create, to transform, we need to look at structural causes. We assume that the risk analysis have to do with intersectionality, discrimination, threats, slandering. Taking this to the courts, this goes through these gender elements that are associated to social macho the situation, also that is also misogynist. And the way that we face all of this, we face the risk. This has meant in reflecting that as we defend, we break the rules because we do not follow the roles that we have been given with our partners, with our families. And these transgressions have really taken us to face other type of violence, but to generate conflicts that allow a transformation. And not only for us, the conflict is outside, but our participation also brings another type of complex that are involved in this huge conflict that we want to take forward to build a culture of peace. That's why we mention that conflict also is in favor of the gender stereotypes. So this is reproduce, strengthen, and they take us to awful impact to women, and we can turn into victims of sexual torture, or we can be used for activities that are not decided by us. And all of this violence are expression of this macho expression from our experience. The way that we've built this means to find ourselves as women that defend all of this, and where our needs are placed at the forefront, and we can generate organizational processes that allow to walk towards the construction and the transformation of these relationships. And at the same time, it means a process for strengthening ourselves from the collective, from our own being, our own feelings, the way that we see the world, in order to be part of these problems. And at the same time, for women, this means that we can use other spaces of participation, that we can walk through self-knowledge that will really trigger our capacities with others, that women can find ourselves and generate organizational processes that are transformative. As I mentioned, this means to through our relationships together as family, organization of movements, and this has high cost because this triggers conflicts associated to the compliance of our subordinated position in order to bring more autonomy, decision making, and all. And with this, under this framework, is that the national network of defenders through the 4këPAZ, part of a transformation process for peace building, cannot be sustained if it's not based in how we question and how women are being discriminated from our own spaces, from our small spaces. It could be family and the organization, community, the movement. And here, in order to continue with the presentation, I give the floor to my friend Dora. Thank you, Gloria. Good morning, and thank you for having me here. I agree, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And we're going to provide continuity to this presentation of the network of advocates. I agree with my colleagues before me that one of the main things that we're going to have to reflect upon to think about peace is what type of peace are we talking about? And in this sense, what we say is if we live at peace as a concept of development. This is developed from the Charter of the UN, as well as other instruments for human rights. People can have different ideas towards this word of peace. In order to get to peace, we must consider the characteristics of context, as well as those involved in conflict, needs, and expectations. The way that we look and the way that we look differentiated of women that we're building from different spaces talks about a series of experiences, different places, and in Mexico is no different from the community spaces, from the organizations, and particularly in the national network of advocates. We are building these roads for peace. From the outlook of the feminist protection that we work in this group of advocates, we start from the existence of a context of nations to human rights that is fed by violence, lack of equality, justice, and all of these expressions that we can see as an expression of a power that is dominated with different faces that are visible, not so visible in other cases. And this context is what, as advocates, we want to make visible, we want to show, to contribute from our networks, from our experience towards a right placement in order to go to walk towards a fair society from the education of human rights and the human rights of women, all the way to the defense. So in a way that women and everyone knows, executes, demands, conditions, and the challenges of human rights when they have been touched. I'm going to talk about some other things. Gloria has talked about the risks that we face and the impact. Also, we've heard about the vision of feminism, where not only we have the lack of equality between men and women, but we have a broad outlook, and we feed from non-hegemonic vision, environmental awareness, and all of that, all of those principles in the original peoples, where we can see care and the well-being of life at this center as something that is important. We see from our vision as advocates, we have decided to have this vision of care at the center, that we contribute to peace building. Other areas as the physical security, digital security, and with a different culture. Among other factors, in peace building, we see that we must acknowledge ourselves and to identify that we have interests that are affected, and we need to be aware of the risks of those impacts that are differentiated, and from there to have strategies. And also to respect the process of the people that we walk with, to acknowledge that we have tools in our context, the diverse context for our care and well-being. Besides all of this and the creation of different spaces among women, where we can strengthen our capacities in order to face all this lack of equalities and conflict resolution, I think it's also important to acknowledge, talking about Resolution 1325 and the regulatory framework that we heard before, that in Mexico, when we have a regulatory framework, it's important always to look at this in our work as advocates for human rights, from the acknowledgement of human rights as something that is important, that brings our country in international context, and certain acknowledgement of the rights to the original peoples and African American. The acknowledgement in the Afro-Mexican, I apologize, and everything that has to do with equality. particularly the right of women to a life free of violence. I'm going to go to the areas that are an obstacle of peace. And here what we see is that this context that does not leave the state out, but is a context of violence, impunity before the violation to human rights. It's a factor for peace. And a lot of the times, the different stakeholders contribute and manage conflicts as well. At the level of the community, the effects, the harmful effects of some of the programs that are promoted from the governments. This is also walking, working, moving, and all of those that have to do with the agricultural part that have really made it to those companies that are generating a lot of conflict. We see another factor that is an obstacle for peace, the exponential increase of violence between women, children, and adolescents, an increase in feminicides, and other problems such as women trafficking, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, in the context of all the outsourcing and also working out in the land, farming. On the other hand, in the past 20 years, we can see an increase in the attacks to those advocates of human rights. The mechanisms for protections are not working in an efficient manner. We have seen that the budgets also are being cut down in this context of peace. And we can see that the restriction to immigration and the serious violations to human rights are part of this context. The conflicts that I was talking about in the territory of the original peoples, where the common goods are also related with an uneven relationship and with the violent groups. Indifference towards peoples that are in conflicts, post-conflicts or during conflicts for competitiveness. Because what we say that in Mexico, we don't have a situation like in Colombia because we have not reached or we don't have this problems with an army like they've had. We have the experience in Chiapas, but I believe it's different. We don't have this background, but we have so many factors that are increasing conflict in different processes in the country. And these problems need not only our care, but the focus in gender that we have been discussing. But not only this, but a cultural, environmental, intersectional focus that allows us to stop this spiral of conflict that we are involved in. We see that there are some other things, some other problems, such as polarization and social confrontation that we are undergoing in a dispute among the different groups of organized crime in different regions in our country. I believe that with respect to gender perspective, Gloria has already discussed about this and how to strengthen leadership. And we agree that we need to create those spaces and processes where women and men are interested women and adolescents can consider other conditions that may be able to give their opinion, that they can say how they see conflict and how they acknowledge their experience and needs, as well as proposals. To know, acknowledge what are their dreams and their peace. Something extremely important that we see is that throughout conflict and violence, at the core, there's a topic of gender, there's discrimination, there's vision of the use of violence, of force that has to do with the problems. And what we were saying, that we believe it's important to take on a phrase that has been coined, that in the Chiapas in the 90s, they said that if we're used to something, it turns into respect. We say that this phrase can be used to every context and diversity of women, not only in this last context. Of course, we see that we have to be part of the decisions. We are peace builders. From the defense, we are in the construction of this new situation from so many places. From the feminist point of view, it's a lot of hope for women, and we can see how this has been able to place in a discourse and a narrative of a society that is more inclusive, a society that takes us into account for what we are, more than half of our people. I think in Mexico, to make it visible, those processes post-conflict in which gender perspective is being considered, which includes some mandates towards the government in order to inhibit the repetition of violation to human rights that have really affected all of this. And I'm talking about the cases of Ignacio Valentin Guerrero. I'm talking about all the complaints that were filed about sexual violence, the case of Ernestina Menzopolita, and of course, our colleagues in Chiapas. I believe these are references that we need to take into account in this strategy for peace building. Of course, to exchange experiences like the one that we have right here between networks, women, organization, communities, as we build proposals from different areas about the culture of good care and peace building. And I close by saying that for all of this, we need that our governments, our Mexican government, becomes responsible with the budget in order to help these spaces for build peace and security. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you both. And what we have seen is that our colleagues have started weaving with what they have heard from each other. What we would like to do is to take more time for this. And we're going to give about 5 minutes each one of the speakers in order for you to keep the dialogue with what you have heard from the others. And we're going to ask Manuela Mesa from the Center of Education and Investigation for Peace.
Gracias a vosotras. Bueno, impresionantes las presentaciones, ¿no? Y la verdad es que me suscitaba pues muchísimas preguntas, ¿no?
that you know, this is bringing on so many questions. I believe
muchos elementos comunes como defensoras
that
de los derechos
there's
humanos,
a lot of common
pero,
elements. People
o al menos entender, ¿no? ¿Por qué, por ejemplo, para el caso de Colombia, la búsqueda, por ejemplo, en el trabajo que ellas realizan, incluso a nivel local, la búsqueda de la solidaridad internacional, la alianza con otras organizaciones? Y yo tengo la impresión de que en el caso de México, tal vez porque es un país muy grande, ¿no? Y a lo mejor y existen redes que son muy grandes, pero creo que el peso que ha podido tener la vinculación de la red de defensoras de derechos humanos fuera, no sé si ha sido tan fuerte o tan importante o ha sido una estrategia incluso para fortalecer las acciones locales, ¿no? O sea, yo, por ejemplo, miraba, el gobierno mexicano dice que ahora se va a hacer un plan de acción, pero no parece que esa sea una demanda de las organizaciones defensoras de derechos humanos, o al menos parece que hay otras cuestiones que están por delante. Entonces, yo no sé, escuchando las dos experiencias, me preguntaba cuál puede ser, porque los niveles de violencia creo que son altísimos. No creo
the
que
levels
sea
of
ahora mismo
violence, I
ni el
think
nivel de
they're very high.
riesgo.
I don't think
Creo
it's the
que
same level
podrían ser
of risk.
bastante
I think
comparables, ¿no? Incluso
that
aunque Colombia haya habido un conflicto armado y en
it could
México
be
no,
compared even in
pero
Colombia there
el
was an
número de
armed
la
conflict
violencia
and in
que hay es muy
Mexico there
fuerte, ¿no?
wasn't.
Y entonces, no sé si yo una explicación que
I
pensaba
know
era pues, que
there's
la
an
situación en
explanation
México con el
for
crimen
this,
organizado es tan
and this
compleja que
has to
hace
do
que
with organized
a lo
crime,
mejor esa
which is
coordinación
of
entre las
course a
redes de
very
defensoras no sea tan visible.
complex
Pero, digamos,
answer
la parte
for things that
internacional,
are
¿en qué
sometimes
medida
not
un
so
apoyo
visible.
internacional más
But
fuerte podría ser
how
importante para el
important
trabajo
is
local?
international
Sí que me parece
support
que en el caso
for
de
local
Colombia
work?
es como muy claro y
In
Diana lo ha
Colombia, this is
mencionado
very clear.
y no lo veo tan visible en el
I
caso
don't
de
see
México,
it
pero
so
no sé
visible for
si
Mexico, however.
estoy equivocada
Am
o
I
no juega un
wrong?
factor tan importante.
Or
Entonces les quería
isn't
preguntar
it
sobre eso,
such an
pues
important
tanto a
factor for
las
Mexico?
a
This is a
Dora
question
como a
for
Gloria, también como a
Dora and
Diana. No sé
Gloria
cómo lo ve
and
ella
Diana.
desde Colombia.
How do you
O a
see it from
Dolores, porque
Colombia,
Dolores trabaja la
Diana,
transformación
or
positiva
Dolores
del
as well?
conflicto y entonces
She's
supongo que
working
tenéis
with
pues algunos elementos en ese
conflict-related
sentido.
issues as well in a very positive manner. Please. Thank you, Manuela. We thought of answering in the same sequence according to the order of the questions we were getting, unless you disagree. So let me ask Dolores Gonzalez, could you share with us some reflections, please? Thank you. This has to do in part with what Manuela just said. The difference I see among the different experiences that may enrich themselves. I see the process to build an agreement as of a regulated conflict. On the other hand, in Mexico, we haven't even been able to give a consensus. The armed conflict in Mexico, which is absolutely different, with different diffused actors, non-state actors. As non-conventional conflict is a hybrid irregular war, but it doesn't have possible spaces for the building of agreements because participants do not have the legitimacy for that. So the organized solution through a regulated process for the signing of a peace agreement, in this case, we cannot build it in the same manner. I think one of the challenges we face in Mexico, this is what I wanted to converse with our Colombian friends and all the lessons they've learned before the peace agreements. That is, how can we start building more horizontal? Our main challenge in Mexico has to do with multiple expressions of feminism and the gender agenda. where we have not been able to build a consensual agreement base more than the rejection on patriarchal relations, especially patriarchal violence. This is the main axis of convergence in Mexico. However, this exchange and building of the horizontal agreement has been particularly difficult. And I think this even has to do with an intergenerational issue as well. Feminism accumulating a lot of experience with a lot of clarity and public incidents. But there's another important factor that has a lot of social support aimed at no more than aimed at the yes. So I think this has been increasingly difficult because in Mexico we have a strategic vision, which is quite an excluding the strategy of who's collaborating with the government, especially after the new administration took over in 28. We have women participating with this. These women have incidents and negotiating power vis-a-vis the government. This is the social traditional structure, and others are challenging things. I think that's where the Mexican feminism is located right now, this area of confluence for common strategies, and also the ethical political way of seeing this. I would also like to hear that and know the experience that allowed you to do this in Colombia, and what skills did you work on to strengthen self-reliant, self-sufficient processes within your organizations, communities, not only working with women and a gender feminist perspective, but for everyone, for this convergence to be possible in the peace process. Did you have any similar representation in Colombia in the negotiating process? The proportional part, that's what I'm talking about. Thank you. Everything has been so interesting. Listening to all of you has been quite exciting. Thank you, Dolores. So let's give the floor to Diana Maria Salcedo Lopez of the International League for Women and Freedom in Colombia. You have the floor. Yes, thank you. Answering your questions would mean another session. I have so many things to tell you about our experience, but just a few things here. The relationship among us, the women's movements, social organizations in Colombia has never been very easy. It hasn't been a garden of flowers. It has never been romantic or anything like that. We have different organizations. Some think work within the government is very important. Others say, well, which government are you talking about? And this means tensions and stress. When we were going through the peace process, we agreed on something. We were either united and would give our lives for peace, or peace would be an agreement just made by men. So this defined our work. And each one of the steps we met as organizations and independent women, we recognized we all had a common interest, reaching the peace agreement with the FARC guerrilla movement, knowing that all structural problems would not vanish, but fully knowing that peace and the agreement would allow us to have a better tomorrow. That would be a possibility for us women to demand an agenda recognizing women. This moved our hearts, our senses, our skin, our heads, everything was moving. We started being very creative and accomplices with the participation of the international community. Many countries played a very important role in all this. They gave us resources for our meetings, for territorial processes, and to listen to each other, knowing what was important in this peace agreement. Something fundamental is that we were understanding that everything was just as important. There was not one thing more important than the other. We had to incorporate women in the land tenure issue, but also very important was reincorporating women. That was a very ambitious agenda, but we were able to reach agreements on it. I could tell you 1,001 stories of what happened. This was no easy task. We had a lot of stress, discussions, arguments, long hours of documents that were not able to have a consensus agreement very easily. We spoke with government women, with FARC women as well, for us to be accomplices and for us to explain to them what our agenda was all about. On the other hand, we did something else. We have continued. We knew we were the transforming agencies. So we wanted to talk about peace in every corner of Colombia. All the women started teaching about peace throughout the country. And in the Havana negotiating panels, we spoke to them. In Cuba, where our negotiators from Colombia were working, and we said, this is our position. Marvelous things took place. We had the Women's Summit on Peace, gathering opinions of women all over Colombia. This was unprecedented in my country. This meant we had important participation in the table of dialogue. It wasn't paritary. There were many women who were plenipotentiary representatives of the government. They were the spokespersons working on gender issues. There we almost had all women working on gender issues, but this was a channel of the agenda and the voices of women in Colombia. We tried to generate dialogues with complicities that we never thought would be possible because we were in completely different ideological segments, but we were able to do it. You still have 1 minute. Well, that's good. Thank you. Marvelous. A relationship with the government. We implemented the first years of the peace agreements with an administration with a position against the agreement. This has been terrible for everyone, for women, for all of us, but we've gained something. We reinforced our autonomy vis-a-vis this type of government. For instance, now, less than 2 weeks ago, commemorating 1325 activities, we took distance away from the government and we started meeting. However, the government never invited us to meet with it officially. People were asking us about sitting down to talk to the government. We said we are not. The government is not calling us to be with the government sitting down. However, women in Mexico have so many experiences. They are opposing the government. The women in Mexico, in Guatemala, and Costa Rica have inspired us because they're standing in front of the government in their countries, not within the government of their countries. Well, here in Colombia, we said we're going to move forward, all of us united, commemorating 1325. We are going to be talking about peace. We have a 200 document that will soon come out. It will soon be disclosed. We said the government is failing in the peace agreement implementation and failing work with women in Colombia. Thank you, Diana. Now, let me give the floor to Gloria Guadalupe, National Network of Human Rights Defenders and Advocates. Please, after that, Dora. Thank you. one of the challenges has been how to coincide through a common agenda. I think this challenge has sustained the national network of human rights advocates. We've been very careful to have comprehensive protection for defenders and to have their human rights respected. This challenge has different ways of looking at feminism and territorial spaces where we work. We also have different stakeholders and conflicts. So I think the commonality has been placing right at the center these feminist protection activities, making sure that the network is one of the tools guaranteeing protection of women defenders and advocates. In this sense, our interlocutor's role has been making this visible among the international community in the different contexts and territories, because the challenge has also been how can we approach other subject matters in this network with different different ways rather of looking at things with different positions as well. This has to be with a dialogue and facing challenges, the challenge of strengthening exchanges with our sisters in the different territories. So this implies a territorial way and outlook with different conditions throughout the country, the south, the southeast, the central part, and the northern parts of the country. We are the same Mexico, but we have complex conditions that make our work very complex. So I think this is a challenge in our network, how to build a more compact agenda, not only including protection, but also generating other processes to favor advocates. We, women defenders, are working to build peace. In this sense, we've used instruments as CEDAW and specific recommendations of rapporteurs made by the United Nations, of special reports from United Nations rapporteurs. Please, Dora. Please go ahead, Dora. Thank you. I think what Dolores is mentioning or setting on the table is a good opportunity. There are 3 Mexicans participating in this panel with the support and accompaniment of our Spanish and Colombian sisters. I think something we're lacking, aside from everything we've already mentioned, is sharing agendas for them to be intersectional. We have thematic networks, although we are united in some actions sometimes. We each do our thing. Each network follows its own agenda. We have to have this interrelationship and dialogue among agendas so that we can all have this intersectional way of seeing things and doing things. We have a very complex context requiring us to do this, to join forces and recognize all of us among ourselves. Another difference has been our disqualifying, our not knowing each other. So we're not as strong as we need to be. We have to recognize ourselves, to strengthen ourselves among all of us in our diversity. I remember a phrase of a sister who said, we need all of us, we need each other, and this is true. And in the Colombia case, well, we need ourselves. What about our relationship with the state? The interlocutor incidents, experiences with the government have been wearing our feminist movements out. The feminist movement is betting on political and public policy incidents, but on the long run, we do not get the right results or accomplishments we want to have. We see this backward movement in our movements, especially with sexual reproductive rights. This is happening right now. I think we should be holding a dialogue for the intersectional characteristic of our agendas. I believe we are in a context that makes this an obligation for all of us. There is non-recognition of civil society right now and work of organizations. So for us to be listened to, we have to strengthen our side through the intersectional characteristic of our agendas. Now, in terms of the question, how are we using 1325? Reading Resolution 1325, I think there are ever-present elements in our experiences. However, I don't think we have given them a name. They're not so linked to this instrument. I think this Congress, this meeting, this conference is an invitation for us to revisit that instrument. We have readdressed CEDAW, the Beijing platform, and other important instruments, as for instance, the resolutions from Brazil, the Belém do Pará resolution, but this is not so clear in terms of facing situations of conflict. I think we would have to readdress 1325. Thank you, Dora. Thank you. I want to thank everyone. There's a YouTube comment. Migdonia Rueda is saying, I second what Diana just said. And our colleague Norma Villarreal has spoken about 3 points of connection from our Colombian friends, and this is all related to national public policies. Let me use these minutes we have left to see if any of you want to react on this question. How far and in which cases does the state participate in the peace process? Is there work not related to those institutions? And of course, I'm talking to peace building or peace agreement work. Is there a place where the government should not be participating in that process? Well, let me say a couple of things for others to later speak. I think peace in our Constitution, rather, peace is a principle, a right and a duty, and they're all binding and mandatory. States are not isolated to exert that duty. And on the other hand, aside from international accords, we are sitting on the rule of law. This means moving towards peace, not a state promoting war. If it's a state promoting war, it is failing in its protection to guarantee people's lives and security. That's not peace. For me, there is no moment, no place in history where the states can say, we're not going to be building peace. We're not working on this. We're not going to use resources to transform inequalities. This is not possible. As long as we are living in the rule of law, this has to be done. A dictator is another story. Yes, please, Dolores. The question is very interesting. I would see it at different levels. However, we are reaching a general consensus, I think, where this model is exhausting. It's quite exhausted at the political and economic levels, and this peace transforms structures to generate new cohabitation, coexistence models. So this piece is a different reality, not like what we are going through right now, something we have to imagine and build. We have to think about the regulation model as well to guarantee better conditions for peace. But from here to that point, I agree that it will be necessary to interact to create the context where it will be possible to build processes of grassroots level with a social basis to them. This will be a significant contribution long run. Every significant changes take place bottom up. And we have to look at legal rule of law issues of participation and security for us to move forward towards new forms of coexistence. In that sense, the state is part of this path for the necessary agreements to have this path become viable without discrimination, without inequality, patriarchal domination, and violence. For that to take place, we have to build them. Along the way, we have to interact among the different actors of society, the state included. Of course, we will have to think about economic actors as well, and the horizontal relationship among men and women who are the stakeholders and social actors. But I think the most difficult change, the main challenge we face has to do with the cultural changes we need. Basically, this is the responsibility of the transforming processes protagonized by women and movements vindicating gender relations. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dolores. Dora, Gloria, Manuela, would you like to complement our conversation? I wanted to revisit what someone already mentioned, the need to readdress various visions and cosmovisions to build peace. Perhaps the peace concept is built through a westernized vision, a vision that includes the states more than anyone else. But I think we have to do this construct of peace building from the different visions, taking into account, for instance, the original peoples, where we have to be watching over common property and goods. If we have no water, if we don't have enough land for crops, if we don't have minimal conditions to live in peace and serenity with our needs met, then it is very difficult for us to be able to talk about peace. There will always be conflicts and conflictivity. Thank you, Dora.
Sí. Bueno, a mí me gustaría añadir a lo que dicen las compañeras. Yo creo que la construcción de paz es algo que trasciende al Estado. Es decir, que justamente, ¿no? Es decir, que sí que desde la sociedad civil hay alianzas en el plano internacional que se orientan en el sentido de luchar pues, contra una sociedad militarizada, contra la inversión en armas. Y yo creo que estamos en un momento crucial, en el sentido que bueno, estamos viviendo una pandemia de carácter global que muestra muy claramente que los problemas de seguridad que existen ahora en este momento en el plano global no tiene nada que ver con tener más armas o tener una tecnología militar más sofisticada, sino todo lo contrario, ¿no? Y por lo tanto, es decir, podríamos decir que sería un buen momento para esas transformaciones, ¿no? Y para hacer alianzas a nivel global, local, ¿no? A mí una de las cosas aquí discutimos mucho en España fue cómo se adoptó un lenguaje belicista para hablar de la pandemia, diciendo que había que derrotar al virus, etcétera. Y decíamos, bueno, pues es que esto no es la manera de afrontarlo, no queremos héroes y heroínas luchando contra el virus. Y al final la propia realidad nos ha mostrado que tenemos que cohabitar con el virus y tenemos que aprender a vivir en ese espacio, pues porque no hay otra solución. Entonces yo creo que, claro, que el Estado tiene una responsabilidad en garantizar, en proteger, pero también creo que en el plano global es muy importante, por eso que comenta también Dora, que existen una serie de bienes públicos como es la salud. O sea, la salud en este momento es un bien público global. Y garantizar la provisión de ese bien público pasa por alianzas
goes through
multinivel, o
alliances
sea,
that
en el
are
plano local, en
multi-level
el plano nacional, pero
partnerships,
también en el plano
local,
internacional, porque no
national,
podemos pensar que
international
ciertas
partnerships. We
amenazas, si
cannot
se
say
resuelven en
that
nuestro entorno, se
those
van a
threats
resolver
in
a
our
nivel
own
global. O sea,
environment
no
will be
estaremos seguros,
solved
seguras,
locally.
hasta que no,
We
digamos,
have to
se
use the
plantee
global
en
side
esa
of all
doble dirección
this.
global, local, ¿no? Entonces,
This
bueno,
is a
o sea,
dual
que es una tarea de todos, pero yo creo que
direction we're
quienes pueden
following.
empujar, quienes
But
pueden
I
hacer
think that
propuestas, quienes
those
están
that can
construyendo
push and
propuestas,
make
son las
proposals and
organizaciones de
build
sociedad civil
proposals
y
are
dentro de
civil
ellas
society
las organizaciones
organizations.
feministas, yo creo que están haciendo
Feminist
aportaciones muy
organizations are
interesantes,
making
poniendo,
very
porque hay una
interesting
experiencia, además, en una
contributions
especie de
in this
cuidado,
regard
hay
because
toda una
there's
experiencia que se
caregiving
puede poner
experience women
al
have
servicio,
experience
digamos,
at
de
the
esta nueva
service
situación que
of
estamos
this new
viviendo, ¿no?
terrible
Y bueno,
situation
tenemos
we
que
are
ser
going
tenidas
through.
en cuenta,
We
pero
have to
las
be
propuestas
taken into
están,
account,
es decir,
but
que
the
después
proposals are there
se conviertan en
that
propuestas
they
políticas,
become
pues bueno,
political
va a ser una
proposals
cuestión
later. Well, this
digamos,
is
quienes
going
tienen el
to
poder, pero yo creo que las
be
propuestas están
up
y
to those that
visibilizarlas
have
es muy
powers, but
importante.
the proposals are there, and I think they should be taken into account. Thank you, Manuela. Unfortunately, we do not have more time for this session. What a marvelous panel we've had with experiences that are being listened to loud and clear through this virtual channel. However, for the first time, we've been able to hold a dialogue to build outlooks, challenges, and global responsibilities. We want to thank everyone. I take with me two phrases, one by Diana and the other one by Dora. Diana said, in the face of this conflict, women in Colombia had to be listening to each other and understand each other as women. What do we understand when we talk about peace? And Dora said, we all need each other on this path. I want to thank everyone for participating in this very passionate panel. If there are questions or comments, I don't think there are some through YouTube or Zoom. However, we can continue holding this dialogue and we will send you an answer. Thank you everyone for participating. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for being our moderator. Thank you for this panel. This has been a wonderful panel with a lot of learning, I'm sure. I really thank everybody that has participated. And we have the next panel. Our best regards to all of you, Teresa, Manuela, Dora, our colleague from Colombia, Diana, everyone. A big hug to all of you, and we'll see you here. Thank you for inviting us. It was our pleasure.
Muchísimas gracias, compartir.
Thank you.
Besos para todas.
And
Que
our
estén
best
muy
regards.
bien.